You were an Acts 29 pastor, which would again be one of those kind of churches that people would say, well, that's, conservative, big on inerrancy, reformed perspective on things. But you left that and it was connected to those reasons. Would you be up for just talking us through a little bit of what that journey was and what caused you to make that decision?
Sure. Yeah. So I moved out with 3 of my college buddies and to plant a church, and we did it well before we were ready. I was not qualified in hindsight, looking back. I was not biblically qualified to be a pastor. The church that we planted was a glorified small group for a long time, and just things were messy. Things were not up to par with biblical standards. We were a part of the Vineyard Association of Churches at the time, so think John Wimber. Vineyard came out of Calvary Chapel, Chuck Smith. It was kind of like the more charismatic, sign gift embracing version of Calvary Chapel, and so that's kind of my background, childhood, and the way that I grew up and was raised, and so did that. But then we became an Acts 29 church multiple years after we had moved to church plant initially with the Vineyard. Again, during those days, it was some Bible study in my home, and then a small music venue, and really a glorified kind of like young adults group or singles group. We called it a church because we were stupid. But eventually God, really brought conviction for me and those 3 guys. They stuck around, and we've been long-term friends for many years, coming up on 20 years now. And so by God's grace, we realized, one of the things that needed to happen is that we needed to grow up, and we needed to be assessed. And primarily me, if I was going to be the pastor of this church, I needed to make sure that it actually became a church, that it was a biblical church, and that I was a biblically qualified man. And so at the time, the group that I had heard about and heard good things was Acts 29. Like a lot of young men who, I was a Calvinist by this point in terms of my view of soteriology, how God saves, that God's sovereign in salvation. And so I liked the preaching of Matt Chandler. I liked the preaching of Mark Driscoll. And I had heard good things about their assessment process. So that lasted about a year, and that was from 2013 to 2014, going through almost a year-long assessment process, working on my character, working on nipping the sin of lust, particularly in the bud as a young man, and striving for accountability, sexual purity, being sure that I was biblically qualified in the character arena, but then also competency and preaching and theology. And when we completed that, we officially then covenanted/planted our Acts 29 church in April of 2014 in San Diego, California. And there were a lot of good things. So I don't want to be overly disparaging. The assessment process with Acts 29 really was thorough and robust in many ways. And it wasn't just, sitting down with guys for a one-time event. But those same guys who assessed me then followed up with me weekly, or at least every other week, for a total of nine months, maybe a little bit over. And holding me accountable and helping me with preaching and helping me with character. And so that was really good. I think Acts 29, the bread and butter, probably the best thing about the network, at least when I was a part of it, was their assessment process. That was really helpful, to take guys who wanted to church plant or were, LARPing already as a church planter, which was my case. I was a church planting LARPer, and making them an actual church planter, actually biblically qualified in many regards. Problem is that, skip forward now from 2014 to 2018. By that time, I was just I was sick of what I had come to see as an embrace, and I want to say a subtle embrace, but honestly, it was kind of an overt, blatant embrace of critical race theory, of intersectionality, social justice, what we would consider, wokeness. And so 2018 was kind of the final straw. That's when Eric Mason, who was at the time on the international board for Acts 29 and a close friend of Matt Chandler, so not just a random Acts 29 pastor, but very involved at the top in shaping the culture and the doctrine and the beliefs, the priorities, the emphases of the network. He came out with his infamous book, Woke Church. And I read that book, and I said, this is terrible. This is garbage, and I don't want to be a part of this. And so my elders, I presented my concerns to them. They agreed, and so we made the decision to leave the Acts 29 network. And at that point, we didn't want to quickly jump into, we had gone from, vineyard church planting LARPers to Acts 29, an actual biblically qualified church, but still, with room to grow, Acts 29. And so we didn't want to just, go from vineyard to Acts 29 to something else. So we thought, in true Baptist fashion, first, let's see if we can affirm a historical confession of faith. And so the quintessential confession within the Reformed Baptist tradition would be the 1689 Second London Baptist Confession of Faith. So 2019, we spent a year going through that as leaders and elders and other guys who would be maybe potential elders in the future. And working on that, saying instead of joining another denomination or network, let's just be in true Baptist fashion, autonomous, a local autonomous church. That's Baptist polity. There's no presbytery. There's no Episcopal church polity or anything like that. And so we were working on that and trying to put the theological guardrails in with adopting a confession, and we were unable to do so. I personally adopted the confession. The church that I preach at now and pastor now, Covenant Bible Church, we are confessional. But the elders that I had at the time in Southern California, throughout that year process in 2019, we weren't all able to wholesale adopt the 1689. The Sabbath was a sticking point. Some ideas of gospel, law and gospel, and what that actually means was a sticking point. And so that didn't happen. And then that led us into 2020. And so there were already some theological division developing in 2019 with our attempt, leaving Acts 29, and our attempts to graduate theologically. I would view it as a theological evolution, a graduation from being mere Calvinistic Baptist to being traditionally, confessionally Reformed Baptist. Acts 29 is, they're Calvinistic, but even that, you technically don't even have to hold to all 5 points of Calvinism. Mark Driscoll never did. He always rejected limited atonement. He was a 4-point Calvinist. As the late, great R.C. Sproul would say, what do you call a 4-point Calvinist? An Arminian. So all that being said, we wanted to go from Calvinistic Baptist to actual Reformed Baptist in the confessional vein, the historic vein, and weren't able to do that. But weren't able to do that collectively, unanimously as elders. And so that attempt over the course of a year to be able to do that highlighted and brought to the surface, hey, we have more disagreements than we thought. Theologically. So there's already some theological division and fracturing among us with the leadership of the church. And then boom, COVID, boom, Black Lives Matter, and all the things of 2020. So we already had some fracturing going into 2020, and that just took, the hairline fractures and just dropped an anvil on it and shattered things. By God's grace, there's no animosity. They love me. I love them. The relationship obviously is not the same. We're in two different places. And so, there's been fallout. But the guys who stayed are biblically qualified men. The guys who left, by God's grace, myself and another elder who came with me, are biblically qualified men. But that really, and I remember thinking, man, we messed up. This is terrible. Things should. But then as I heard story after story, about half of the churches around the world went through church splits. We weren't alone. A ton of churches split at that time, fractured at that time. Churches that didn't split still, might as well have. Maybe the leadership was aligned, but they lost half of their members. And that was just kind of this phenomenon of 2020 and carrying over to 2021, 2022. And we're still in it. I think the dust is still settling. What is the right response to culture, to politics, to this, to that? How should the church live in this new world, but with an old book that we're supposed to follow that doesn't change just because the time and the culture has? And so that's where we're at today. And by God's grace, a lot of these splits, guys have said it, Vodi Bakum said it, R.C. Sproul said it, multiple guys have said that division is good. It's not what we're striving for. We're striving for truth. But the only way to have unity across the board with no divisions at all is to get rid of truth. You can get along with everybody if you don't have any convictions. But the moment that you have convictions and you draw lines in the sand surrounding this is true and this is not, well, then all of a sudden you're going to have some people who are with you, and you're going to find out that some people are not with you. And so I think that the division that we've seen in the church, it's disheartening on the one hand because our numbers are maybe smaller than we previously thought. However, it's encouraging, and I think it's more encouraging than disheartening. It's encouraging on the other hand because the people who are still with us are really with us. That we actually, we're not just united around theology in theory, or theology in the abstract, or a general ambiguous, truth, but we're much more united on the ground. It's now theology applied, and that's where we saw the dividing point is, hey, we're all these guys together for the Gospel Coalition, this, all these different groups, and it's like we're united on the gospel, we're united on the big picture stuff, but then come to find out when it comes to applying our theology on the ground, right? We believe these truths. What does it look like to live these truths out with lockdowns and mask mandates? And, and what does it look like to live these truths out with BLM? And what does it look like to live? And that's where the sticking point was. And so there was a ton of division. There still is division, but for every fracture, every line in the sand, every dividing point that we see, on the flip side, I want to encourage Christians, especially young Christians, to see that every dividing point, every division represents a stronger, emphasized truth. That's why the division is there, is because when truth rises, division is the inevitable consequence. But there's only the division because we're getting more serious about the truth.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to help support the channel, you can buy one of these t-shirts or many others from wearecontramundum.com. We've got some fantastic countercultural Christian apparel there. Try to say that 3 times quickly. You can also support us on Patreon or through PayPal. If you're watching on X, please do like and retweet, or re-X. What do they call it? I don't know. If you're on YouTube, you can hit the like or subscribe button. Don't smash it, you'll damage your phone. Just press it in a normal human manner. Also, if you're on YouTube, then you may enjoy this next video.